My name is Olivia Parker, 36 years old, business owner, survivor, and today, victor. As I stand here on the cobblestone path of King Street in Charleston, South Carolina, the air feels warmer than usual. The summer breeze carries a faint scent of blooming magnolias, sweet, almost intoxicating, blending perfectly with the salty air blowing in from the nearby harbor. In front of me, under the pale morning sunlight, is the Magnolia House, a historic fine dining restaurant that's been the jewel of Charleston for nearly 3 decades. And now, it belongs to me. The keys dangle from my fingers, catching the light. Smooth, cold metal. Symbols of everything my brother Daniel tried to steal from me and failed. I can hear his voice echoing in my mind even now from that awful day at the family reunion. The day he stood before everyone and tore my world apart with one cruel sentence. Olivia has filed for divorce. It's tragic, but, well, sometimes infidelity catches up with people. The gasps, the whispers, the faces turning toward me, my parents, my aunts and uncles, my cousins all watching, waiting, judging. I can still feel the sharp sting of betrayal slicing through my chest that day. The feeling of my breath being stolen away, the humiliation, the rage, the helplessness. But what Daniel never understood is this: I don't break, I don't shatter, I rebuild. Because sometimes revenge isn't a loud, vengeful scream. Sometimes it's silent, patient, calculated. It's about teaching a lesson that someone will never forget long after the crowd stops whispering. I glance up at the beautiful wrought iron balcony above the restaurant, the ornate gas lanterns flickering softly even in daylight, casting delicate shadows across the brick facade. This place had been Daniel's dream for years, the ultimate symbol of success in his eyes, status, power, prestige. He obsessed over it long before it ever went up for sale. And now, it's mine. But to truly understand how we arrived at this moment, you need to know where it all began. You need to understand who Daniel is, who I am, and how 20 years of quiet rivalry finally reached its boiling point. I grew up in a picture-perfect Southern family, at least that's how it appeared from the outside. Our home was a beautiful 2-story colonial with white pillars, a wraparound porch, and bright green shutters that always seemed freshly painted. My father, Charles Parker, was a respected real estate developer. My mother, Susan, stayed at home pouring herself into charity events, Sunday brunches, and making sure our appearances were always polished. And then there was Daniel, my older brother, the golden boy. From as far back as I can remember, Daniel was the sun around which our family revolved. He was charming, handsome, athletic, the quarterback of his high school football team, the valedictorian who gave the perfect speech at graduation. Every trophy he won was displayed proudly in the living room cabinet. Every achievement was praised at every dinner party. And me, I was the quiet one, the responsible one, the one who never caused trouble. I studied hard-worked part-time jobs through high school, earned scholarships, and graduated college debt-free. But no matter what I did, Daniel always managed to shine just a little brighter in my parents' eyes. As children, it was harmless enough, a little sibling competition. But as we grew older, Daniel's competitiveness turned darker, subtler, but sharper. It wasn't enough for him to succeed. He needed to succeed more than me. And when I started building my business, a financial consulting firm, I built from the ground up, Daniel couldn't help but downplay it every chance he got. "It's cute that you have your little business," he would say at family dinners, sipping expensive wine he could barely afford. "But you know, Olivia, real success comes from owning assets, buildings, restaurants, things that last." I always smiled politely, biting my tongue. That was my role in the family, the peacemaker, the one who let Daniel's passive-aggressive remarks slide to keep the peace. But deep down, the resentment was building. Daniel's business ventures, on the other hand, were a string of spectacular failures. A failed real estate flip, a failed coffee chain, a failed tech startup. Each time he crashed, my parents would swoop in to bail him out financially, writing large checks with gentle reassurances that he'd get it right next time. And yet somehow I was the one constantly treated like I was playing it safe, like I was the one who wasn't taking enough risk. The irony was suffocating. Then came Michael. I met Michael at a business networking event when I was 31. He was tall, handsome, and incredibly intelligent, an up-and-coming attorney with sharp wit and a warm smile. We fell hard for each other, and within 2 years we were married in a grand ceremony beneath the oaks at Boone Hall Plantation. For a while life felt perfect. Stable career, loving husband, a thriving business. But Daniel couldn't stand seeing me happy. He masked his jealousy behind thinly veiled compliments. "You two make such a great power couple," he would say with that hollow smile. "But I do worry, you know. All those late nights Olivia works with her wealthy clients. You trust that, right, Michael?" He planted seeds, tiny poisonous seeds. At first, Michael laughed them off. But over time, Daniel's manipulations chipped away at his trust, and Daniel knew exactly how to feed those insecurities he had spent his entire life studying how to bend people. Then came the breaking point. I'll pause here because what happens next is where everything spirals out of control. Before I continue, I want you to stop for a moment. Imagine your own sibling, your own flesh and blood, deliberately working behind your back, poisoning your marriage, your career, your very identity, all to satisfy their own fragile ego. That's exactly what Daniel did to me. And when he thought he had finally destroyed me completely, that's when I struck back. But not with anger. With precision. With silence. With power. And when you hear what I did, when you see how the tables turned, you'll understand why sometimes the best revenge is simply letting someone watch you rise higher than they ever dreamed possible. Daniel's first real strike came quietly. It started with whispers. Casual conversations Michael would bring up at night over dinner, his tone light at first but his eyes searching. "So who's that new client? The tech entrepreneur? Andrew something?" "Andrew Lane," I replied one evening without thinking too much about it. "Yes, he's one of my largest accounts. We're restructuring his investment portfolio." Michael's smile was polite, but his jaw tightened ever so slightly. "You've been spending a lot of late nights at the office lately. Just making sure you're not burning yourself out, that's all." I smiled, leaned over the table, and touched his hand gently. "You know how demanding these clients can be. But I promise you, it's all business." And it was. I'd never even dreamed of being unfaithful. But Daniel knew exactly which strings to pull. Weeks passed. The comments continued, slowly becoming sharper. "You spend more time with Andrew than you do with me lately. He sends you gifts now. That watch, it's pretty expensive for a business relationship. Are you sure you're being completely transparent with me, Olivia?" I tried to reassure Michael at every turn, but I could feel the distance between us growing. Daniel was dripping poison into his ear drop by drop. Every family gathering provided Daniel with new opportunities to stoke the flames. "Hey Michael, did Olivia tell you about that dinner she had last Friday with Andrew? Must have been some serious business to keep her out so late." Michael didn't say anything at the time, but later that night he brought it up again. His voice was tight, defensive. "You didn't mention you were out until 11. I told you I had a late client dinner. It was on my calendar. Did you go alone?" My stomach dropped. I looked at him, feeling a mixture of anger and heartbreak swelling inside. "Michael, what exactly are you accusing me of?" He ran his hands through his hair, pacing. "I don't know Olivia, but I know Daniel. And he's worried. He says you're hiding things." That was when I realized how deep Daniel's manipulation had sunk its claws. Michael, my own husband, the man who once swore nothing could shake his trust in me, was choosing to believe my brother's poisonous words over the woman standing right in front of him. But Daniel wasn't finished. What came next was far more calculated, far more devastating. 6 months later, a manila envelope arrived at Michael's law office. No return address. Inside were printed emails, private emails between me and Andrew Lane. Or so it appeared. The emails painted a fabricated story, suggestive messages, innuendos, even hotel booking confirmations, all carefully edited. The digital fingerprints had been wiped clean. Daniel was smarter than most would give him credit for. Michael called me into his office after hours that day. His face was pale, shaken. "Explain these," he said, throwing the papers onto the desk between us. I stared at them, heart pounding in my chest. "This isn't real," I whispered. "These aren't my emails." "Are you saying someone forged all of this?" "Yes." My voice trembled. "Michael, this is not me. I don't even have half these conversations. Someone put this together to make it look like you've been cheating on me for months." His voice cracked. "I would never," I choked. Tears welled in my eyes. "You have to believe me." He stared at me for a long, hollow moment. And then, he shook his head. "I don't know what to believe anymore." That night was the beginning of the end. Our marriage unraveled quickly after that. Michael filed for divorce 3 weeks later, citing irreconcilable differences. His trust was gone. And Daniel, he stayed close by, playing the concerned older brother. "You're better off, man," Daniel told Michael over beers. "She would have hurt you worse if this went on." Michael never even questioned how Daniel came into possession of those emails. My parents were heartbroken. My mother sobbed endlessly but never once asked me directly if the accusations were true. My father simply pulled away, embarrassed by the scandal. The shame spread like wildfire through our extended family. Cousins, uncles, distant relatives, everyone had an opinion. Everyone whispered. Former friends stopped inviting me to events. Clients quietly withdrew from my firm. It was as though Daniel had managed to erase everything I'd built: my career, my marriage, my reputation, in a single devastating blow. And then came the family reunion. Every summer, for as long as I could remember, our family held a grand reunion at our great-aunt's estate, a massive property lined with ancient oak trees draped in Spanish moss nestled deep in the heart of Charleston. It was the one event each year where the entire Parker family gathered under one roof: 4 generations, dozens of cousins, family friends, business partners. Daniel chose that day, the day of our largest public gathering, to stage his grand finale. It was late afternoon when he stood up before everyone. A soft breeze rustled the leaves above as children played in the background and adults mingled with iced teas and cocktails in hand. Daniel cleared his throat dramatically and raised his glass. "If I may have everyone's attention just for a moment." Conversations quieted. Faces turned toward him, smiling, unsuspecting. Daniel adopted a somber expression, the perfect mask of fake compassion. "It's with a heavy heart that I share some unfortunate news," he began. "As many of you may have heard, Olivia and Michael are no longer together." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The past few months have been difficult for Olivia. Mistakes were made and consequences followed. But we are family, and during times like this, we must support one another. I sat frozen at the back of the patio, my hands trembling in my lap. He wasn't finished. Unfortunately, Olivia's business has also suffered greatly due to, well, poor decisions. She's had to file for divorce and bankruptcy. It's heartbreaking, truly. But as her brother, I want to be here for her. I've offered Olivia a place to stay in my home while she rebuilds. The last line landed like a hammer blow. People gasped. Several aunts whispered loudly, eyes darting toward me. My mother covered her mouth. My father's face flushed red with shame, and I sat there numb. Daniel smiled gently, his voice dripping with false warmth. "Let us all keep Olivia in our prayers during this difficult time." The room burst into quiet murmurs, sympathy, pity, judgment. I excused myself, fleeing into the nearby garden where no one could see the tears falling silently down my face. But what Daniel didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have predicted, was that while he was busy crafting his public narrative, I was already preparing my quiet response. Because Daniel had made one fatal mistake. He underestimated me. For weeks after the reunion, I disappeared from family events, from public functions, from most of my life. On the surface, it looked exactly the way Daniel wanted it to, like I was hiding in shame, drowning in failure. But inside my small office apartment downtown, I was doing anything but hiding. I was working. Because while Daniel was busy polishing his reputation and parading around town as the concerned older brother, I was building my defense. Quietly, carefully, and surgically. The forged emails that Daniel had used to destroy my marriage, I still had copies. I had kept every single document from my divorce proceedings, and I had always suspected foul play from the beginning. I had been too devastated at first to fully investigate, but now I had clarity and fury. The kind of fury that sharpens your mind rather than blinds it. Through my professional network, I hired a digital forensics specialist, James Whitaker. Clean-cut, brilliant, expensive. Exactly the kind of person I needed. James sat across from me at my small conference table, his laptop open, scrolling through the files I provided. "These email headers are sloppy," James said, adjusting his glasses. "Amateur-level forgery. Whoever did this copied message contents but failed to properly spoof the metadata. Timestamp server origins, they don't align. So they're fake," I said, my voice tight. He nodded. "Without a doubt. Can you trace where they came from?" He paused for a moment, thinking. "Not directly. Whoever created these files covered their tracks well enough. But with subpoenas and access to certain online services, it's possible to identify which IP address initiated the drafts." My hands gripped the table's edge. "Do it," I said. "Whatever it takes." Over the next 3 weeks, James worked like a surgeon. Subpoenas were filed discreetly. His contacts at several tech companies quietly pulled access logs. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together. Finally, late one evening, he called me back into his office. "It's done," he said simply. He spun his laptop toward me. "The IP addresses linked back to one place. Daniel's home address." I stared at the screen for a long moment, my pulse pounding in my ears. I had the proof. Cold, hard, unforgiving proof. Daniel had manufactured the entire scandal. He destroyed my marriage. He crippled my business. He humiliated me in front of everyone I loved. All for what? Power, jealousy, control. I sat back, exhaling slowly. And yet, I didn't feel satisfaction. Not yet, because I wasn't finished. I could have gone to the police immediately, or filed a civil lawsuit that would have dragged Daniel through public courtrooms and destroyed what was left of his image. But I didn't want simple legal justice. I wanted something that would sting far deeper. Daniel had spent years building his false image of superiority, flaunting his business acumen, constantly chasing his fantasy of opening a world-class restaurant. He had pitched investors, networked with chefs, even designed mock-ups for a place he never had the capital or discipline to open. That dream was his identity. And so when fate delivered me a perfect opening, I took it. 3 months after the family reunion, news quietly broke that the Magnolia House, one of Charleston's most iconic fine dining establishments, was going up for sale. Its longtime owner, Henry Calder, had been indicted on tax evasion and was being forced to liquidate assets. The property was being offered at a significant discount, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the right buyer. And Daniel was desperate to buy it. I knew this because my Aunt Charlotte, a notorious family gossip, called me the moment she heard about it. "Your brother says this is his big break," she gushed over the phone. "He's lining up investors as we speak. He told everyone at brunch last weekend that the Magnolia House will finally have Parker's name on it." I smiled faintly. Good for him. But of course, Daniel didn't know that I had been watching the listing from the moment it went public, and I had no intention of letting him have it. I reached out to my attorney, Sarah Whitmore, a woman as sharp as polished glass, and explained exactly what I wanted. "I need to buy it," I said simply. Sarah raised one eyebrow. "Are you sure that's a lot of capital?" "I have it," I replied. "And if I don't strike now, he will." "Do you want to purchase through your own name?" I shook my head. "No. Create an LLC. I want full anonymity until the papers are signed." The bidding process was aggressive. Daniel made his offer quickly, securing partial funding from a group of wealthy acquaintances who believed in his vision. His proposal was strong, but not strong enough. With Sarah's help, I swooped in quietly behind him with a cash offer. Full price. No financing contingencies. Fast closing. Money talks. And my offer was exactly what Henry Calder's attorneys were looking for. Within 2 weeks, the deal was signed. The Magnolia House was mine, and Daniel never saw it coming. For days after the sale closed, I watched from a distance as Daniel scrambled to understand how his dream slipped through his fingers. He blamed his investors. He blamed market timing. He blamed everything except himself. What made it even more delicious was that no one, not even our family, knew who the buyer was, until I decided it was time to tell him. Personally, I invited Daniel to coffee under the pretense of discussing a business opportunity. We met at a quiet, upscale cafe downtown, one of his favorite spots to flaunt his designer watches and newest tailored suits. He arrived with his usual swagger, kissing me on the cheek like nothing had ever happened. "Olivia, you look great. It's been too long." "Yes, it has," I said, smiling politely. "How's everything?" He sighed dramatically, waving his hand. "Frustrating, honestly. You heard about Magnolia House, I'm sure. Total disaster. I had everything lined up, and some mystery buyer swooped in and grabbed it out from under me. No one even knows who they are? Ridiculous." I sipped my coffee calmly. "Yes, I heard." "Anyway," he continued, leaning forward conspiratorially, "I may have another opportunity coming up soon. And actually, that's partly why I wanted to meet. I thought maybe we could finally collaborate, put the past behind us, work together for once." I set my cup down gently. "Actually, Daniel, there's something I need to tell you." He frowned, confused. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thin manila folder, the property deed ownership documents, the closing statements. I slid them across the table. He opened the folder, skimming through the paperwork. His face drained of color as his eyes locked on the name of the LLC and then on the legal signature beneath it. "Olivia Parker." His mouth opened, but no words came out. "You," he finally whispered, voice trembling. I smiled softly. "Me?" Daniel's fingers trembled as he clutched the documents. His eyes darted across the papers like a trapped animal searching for an escape route that didn't exist. You bought Magnolia House?" His voice cracked as if saying the words out loud might somehow reverse them. I nodded slowly, savoring the moment but keeping my voice calm, steady. "Yes, Daniel, I own Magnolia House." He blinked, swallowing hard. "But why, I thought you were bankrupt." There it was, the lie he had so carefully crafted, now crumbling right in front of him. "I was never bankrupt," I said softly. "I never filed. My business went through a short cash flow issue, that's all. Temporary, manageable. And while you were spreading rumors, I was stabilizing everything behind the scenes." Daniel's lips parted as if to argue, but I raised my hand slightly. "And while you were publicly announcing my supposed financial ruin to the entire family, I was quietly acquiring the one thing you've chased for years." He stared at me, breathing heavily, his jaw clenched tight. You set me up." I tilted my head, smiling faintly. "No, Daniel. You set yourself up." For a moment, there was only silence between us, thick, suffocating. Then his face twisted into a bitter grin as he tried to regain some footing. "Fine, you bought it. Congratulations. But you know what? That's a massive investment for you. Risky. I hope you can handle it. A place like that can bankrupt you for real." I let out a quiet laugh. "Don't worry, I've run the numbers. Extensively. Unlike you, I don't chase dreams I can't afford." His eyes narrowed, the last fragments of his arrogance clinging desperately to his tone. "You're vindictive, Olivia. I was trying to help you. I offered you a place to stay when you were down." My gaze hardened, the calmness in my voice turning razor sharp. "You offered me a place to stay after you manufactured fake evidence to destroy my marriage and sabotage my business. You didn't want to help me. Daniel, you wanted me dependent on you. You wanted to stand over me while I begged for scraps." Daniel's bravado cracked again. His breathing grew shallow. His face flushed red. "You don't know what you're talking about." I leaned forward, my voice dropping low. "I know exactly what I'm talking about. And I have proof." I reached back into my bag and pulled out another folder, this one much thicker. I placed it carefully on the table and slid it toward him. Daniel hesitated before opening it, but when he finally did, his hands began to visibly shake. Inside were printouts of James Whitaker's forensic report, technical data, IP logs, server traces, and detailed explanations. "You forged the emails," I said softly. "You edited fake messages to make it look like I was having an affair. You sent them to Michael anonymously. You destroyed my marriage." Daniel's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "And now," I continued, "I have every bit of evidence that traces it all back to your home computer. Every fake document, every digital footprint." His face drained of all color. Sweat beaded along his hairline. You can't prove that," he whispered, grasping at desperation. "I don't have to prove anything to you," I said. "The authorities will handle that." Daniel's head snapped up, panic flashing in his eyes for the first time. You went to the police." I smiled coldly. "Not yet, but I've consulted my attorneys. Civil charges, criminal charges, identity fraud, forgery, wire fraud. There are multiple avenues to pursue. All I have to do is sign one piece of paper." Daniel's confidence evaporated completely now. His hands covered his face as he exhaled shakily. "You're bluffing," he muttered. I stayed silent, letting the weight of his own fear suffocate him. He looked up again, this time. Smaller, weaker. Like the golden boy mask he had worn, his entire life was finally crumbling into dust. The silence stretched between us like a heavy rope. Finally, Daniel's voice softened, breaking almost like a child. "Why, Olivia? Why are you doing this?" I looked at him carefully. "Because for years you've manipulated everyone around you. You've made my entire life about you, your success, your failures, your insecurities. And every time I worked harder, you found new ways to undermine me. You poisoned my marriage. You humiliated me in front of our family. You burned everything I built, and you thought there would never be consequences." Daniel's lower lip trembled slightly. "You don't understand," he whispered. "I've always felt like I was the failure. I had to prove myself. You always had it together. The business, the perfect marriage, the respect. I couldn't stand watching you win while I kept losing." I let out a quiet breath, the anger inside me softening for a moment, as I saw, maybe for the first time, the raw insecurity underneath all his cruelty. "You didn't have to compete, Daniel," I said softly. "You could have asked for my help. You could have been my brother instead of my enemy. But then I wouldn't have been the one winning," he whispered bitterly. His honesty struck like a knife, sad, pathetic, and far too late. I stood up slowly, collecting my bag. "I own Magnolia House now," Daniel, I said calmly. "And I'll be making my formal public statement next week, clearing my name, correcting every lie you spread. When that happens, you'll have to answer for everything you've done, privately or publicly. That's your choice." Daniel looked up at me, defeated. "You would really destroy me." I stared at him for a long, silent moment. "No," I said softly, "you destroyed yourself." And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving Daniel sitting alone at the table, his carefully built kingdom of lies collapsing around him. The days following my confrontation with Daniel passed in a strange sort of stillness. But beneath that calm surface, massive shifts were already unfolding. My attorneys began preparing the official statement. My PR team crafted the release. The forensic report was packaged in legal language that even the most skeptical observer couldn't dismiss. Every detail was carefully checked, triple verified, and locked in place. But before the media, before the headlines, before the public fallout, there was one confrontation I needed first. The family. Because that was where Daniel's poison had first spread. That was where the whispers had been born, where judgment had taken root, where I had first been forced to sit under the crushing weight of humiliation. I wanted them to hear the truth, not through tabloids, not through lawyers, but directly from me. I called my mother first. Her voice trembled slightly when she answered. "Olivia, is everything okay?" "Yes, Mom," I said softly. "Actually, I want to have a family gathering this weekend. I need to talk to everyone." She paused. The hesitation hung between us. Will Daniel be there? She asked cautiously. I've invited him, I said. But whether he comes is up to him. That Saturday afternoon, our family gathered once again beneath the same grand oaks where my public shaming had unfolded just months earlier. The weather was perfect warm with a light southern breeze drifting through the hanging Spanish moss. Tables were set beneath large white tents. Sweet tea and lemonade flowed freely. The children ran barefoot across the manicured lawn, unaware of the heavy energy hovering in the air between the adults. This time, the atmosphere was thick with nervous curiosity. Everyone had heard rumors. They knew something was coming, but no one knew exactly what. I stood near the front as everyone settled into their seats. My father sat beside my mother, both of them unusually quiet, watching me with cautious eyes. My aunts, uncles, and cousins murmured softly among themselves. And then Daniel arrived. Late, of course. He wore a tailored navy suit, expensive, perfectly pressed, but his face couldn't hide the tension behind the polished exterior. His eyes met mine briefly, and I could see the storm brewing beneath them. I gave him a polite nod. He said nothing. When everyone had gathered, I stepped forward. The whispers faded. The air shifted. Thank you all for coming, I began, my voice steady, calm, measured. As many of you know, a few months ago, Daniel made an announcement at this very spot about the state of my personal and professional life. Some heads nodded, others looked away uncomfortable. At the time, I chose not to respond. Not because what he said was true, but because I needed time. Time to process, time to gather facts, time to rebuild. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. And today, I am here to tell you the truth. The crowd grew even quieter. You could hear nothing but the distant rustle of the trees. The accusations that were made about my marriage, about infidelity, were entirely false. The supposed evidence was fabricated, faked. Gasps rippled through the gathering. Several aunts exchanged wide-eyed glances. My business, I continued, experienced temporary challenges, as many businesses do, but I never filed for bankruptcy. I was never financially ruined. In fact, I gestured to the projection screen I had set up behind me. An image of the Magnolia House appeared, its beautiful brick facade bathed in golden evening light. I am now the sole owner of Magnolia House. Murmurs erupted instantly. That's the restaurant Daniel tried to. She bought it. I thought Daniel was getting it. The confusion washed over the crowd like a wave. I let it build before speaking again. But that is not the full story. I turned toward Daniel now. His jaw tightened, but he remained silent. For those of you who wonder how these lies started, how my marriage was destroyed, how my reputation was attacked, you deserve to know Daniel fabricated emails. He manufactured false evidence to sabotage my relationship. He sent those falsified documents directly to Michael. The color drained from several faces. With the help of digital forensic experts, I continued. We traced every file, every forgery, every digital footprint directly back to Daniel's home network. The crowd fell into stunned silence. Daniel's face had gone pale, beads of sweat forming along his hairline despite the breeze. Everything I'm saying today is fully documented, I added. And my attorneys are prepared to present this evidence in both civil and criminal court. The gasp that followed was louder this time, sharp and collective. My mother clutched my father's arm, visibly shaking. Daniel finally stood, his voice breaking under the weight of the truth. This isn't fair, Olivia. The words fell flat, hollow. You know what's not fair? I said, my tone harder now. That I sat silently while you painted me as a liar. That you turned our family against me. That you watched me suffer just to make yourself feel important. Tears filled my mother's eyes as she looked between the two of us. But, Daniel, she whispered, why would you do this to your sister? Daniel's face crumpled, his voice cracking as years of buried insecurities came pouring out. Because I was always second best, he shouted. No matter what I did, Olivia was always better, more successful, more loved. I wanted to finally be the one who mattered. The words hung in the air like heavy smoke. Aunt Carol gasped. Uncle Richard shook his head. The golden boy facade had finally shattered in front of them all. My father stood now, his voice shaking but strong. "You may have felt overlooked, son," he said, "but nothing justifies what you've done." Tears streamed down my mother's face. "You hurt your own sister, Daniel." Daniel stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like he was drowning in his own collapse. For once, he had no defense. I inhaled deeply, steadying myself. "The legal process will take its course," I said. "That's no longer my battle to fight. But I needed every one of you to hear the truth. Not whispers, not gossip, the truth." I looked around at the faces that had once pitied me, now filled with remorse, embarrassment, even shame. "But let me be clear," I continued, my voice softening. "This isn't just about justice. It's about ending the cycle." I turned to face my family fully. We cannot let envy destroy us anymore. We cannot keep pretending that silence is protection. Silence is what allowed this to happen in the first place. The crowd remained silent, but this time the silence was respectful, listening, reflecting. Then I looked at Daniel one last time. "I hope someday you take responsibility, not because you're forced to, but because you truly understand the damage you caused. Until then, I have nothing more to say to you." And with that, I walked away, my family watching in stunned, sobered silence. In the days following that family gathering, a strange quiet settled over everything. The house, the family group chats, even the streets of Charleston felt different. Lighter somehow, but also raw, exposed, as if years of carefully hidden wounds had been ripped open for the first time in decades. The story, of course, spread fast beyond our family. Not because I wanted it to, but because truth has a way of leaking out once it's finally set free. The Parker family's perfect Southern image had cracked. The whispers that once followed me around town about my so-called scandal, my affair, my bankruptcy, all faded. Replaced now by something else entirely: apologies, awkward glances, and in many cases silence from those who once so confidently believed the worst. Michael, my ex-husband, reached out just a few days after the confrontation. He asked if we could meet. Part of me wanted to ignore him. Part of me wanted to scream. But another part, the part that had spent months grieving the loss of my marriage, still needed to close that door properly. We met at a small park near the waterfront under the towering live oaks. It was quiet, almost peaceful. He stood waiting, his hands tucked nervously in his jacket pockets. "Olivia," he said softly as I approached. "Michael," I replied, my voice neutral. There was an uncomfortable pause. And then, to his credit, he spoke first. "I owe you an apology. A real one. I should have trusted you. I should have listened to you, not Daniel." I nodded but said nothing. He continued, his voice heavy with regret. "I let my insecurities get the best of me. And when those emails arrived, I wanted to believe the worst, because deep down I never felt like I deserved you." His words landed heavily, but they didn't sting like they once would have. "I was broken," he added quietly, "but I didn't have the right to break you along the way." Finally I spoke. "I don't hate you, Michael. I never did. But you made your choice. You chose to believe a lie instead of believing me." He nodded slowly, the guilt written all over his face. "I know," he whispered. We stood there in silence for a few long moments, the wind gently rustling the trees around us. "I hope you find peace," I said softly. "But that chapter of my life is closed." He swallowed, blinking back the weight of his own mistakes. "Goodbye, Olivia. Goodbye, Michael." And just like that, we both walked away in different directions, this time for good. With Michael behind me and the truth finally in the open, I threw myself fully into Magnolia House. The grand reopening was scheduled for early fall, just as Charleston's tourist season reached its peak. The entire staff had been replaced with top talent. The kitchen now run by Chef Amanda Clark, a rising star from New Orleans, who had relocated to help rebuild the restaurant's legacy. The once aging decor had been updated with subtle, elegant, still Southern charm, but elevated with modern class. Deep navy walls, gold accents, chandeliers that sparkled under soft lighting. Every detail reflected not just my investment but my resilience. Opening night was magical. The restaurant was packed with reservations. Well-dressed guests filled the dining room, wine glasses clinked, laughter bubbled through the air. And sitting at the private VIP table right beneath the grand arching window was my mother and father. This time their faces weren't filled with shame or awkwardness. They were proud, truly proud. After dinner, my mother pulled me aside. Her eyes glistened with tears as she hugged me tightly. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," she whispered, "for believing him, for doubting you, for not standing beside you when you needed me most." I pulled back gently, looking into her eyes. "You were scared, Mom." Everyone was. Daniel made it easy to believe his version of the story. "But I should have known better," she whispered again. "You know now," I said softly. "That's what matters." My father, a man who rarely showed deep emotion, stepped in quietly, resting his hand on my shoulder. "You've built something incredible, Olivia," he said simply. "Not just this restaurant, but your life, your strength." I smiled at him. "Thank you, Dad." And in that moment, for the first time in many years, I felt like my parents truly saw me. Not as the quiet, responsible daughter who never needed help, but as a woman who had stood in fire and walked out stronger. Weeks turned into months. The Magnolia House thrived. Its tables were booked out weeks in advance. Food critics praised its revival. My business consulting firm regained its full roster of clients and then some. The public narrative had flipped completely. The media covered my legal battle with Daniel, but I kept my distance from the noise. My attorneys handled everything quietly behind the scenes. Daniel eventually accepted a plea deal for fraud and forgery. He avoided prison time barely, but lost nearly everything financially. His name, once so carefully polished in Charleston's elite circles, now carried a permanent stain. Our family rarely spoke of him after that, not out of spite, but because some chapters simply aren't meant to be revisited. One evening, several months later, I sat alone on the back patio of Magnolia House. The air was cool and crisp. The soft hum of the restaurant inside buzzed with life the way it always should have been. As I sipped my glass of wine, Chef Amanda stepped outside. "Big night again," she smiled. I smiled back. "Every night's a big night when you fought to earn it." She raised her glass toward me. "To survival." I clinked mine gently against hers. "To transformation," I added. Because that's what this truly was. Not just revenge. Not just survival, but transformation. The version of me that Daniel tried to destroy no longer existed. In its place stood something stronger, something unbreakable. That fall evening on the Magnolia House patio, as I sat beneath the soft glow of string lights draped across the courtyard, I found myself thinking about everything that had happened. Not just the betrayal, not just the downfall, but everything before it. The childhood rivalry, the competition I never wanted, the resentment Daniel carried quietly for years while I worked hard, simply trying to build a peaceful life. For so long I had thought our conflict was about money, or jealousy, or power. But sitting there, I finally saw it for what it really was. It was about worth, about identity. Daniel had built his entire self-worth by measuring himself against me. And in doing so, he destroyed not only his relationship with me, but almost destroyed himself along the way. And if I was being honest with myself, painfully honest, I had allowed parts of that dynamic to exist far longer than I should have. I had stayed silent too many times. I had avoided confrontation for the sake of peace. But silence isn't always peace. Sometimes silence is what allows toxicity to grow. And that was my part to own. The next morning, as the sun rose over Charleston, painting the harbor in soft pinks and oranges, I walked along the waterfront. My steps slow, my breath steady. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking with anger in my chest, or sadness, or even victory. I was walking with freedom, not because Daniel was defeated, but because I was finally free from the need to carry his weight. Weeks later, as Thanksgiving approached, my parents invited me for dinner. Our family gathering was much smaller now. Just my parents, a few cousins, no Danielle. And for the first time in a long time, the dinner table didn't feel tense. It didn't feel like a battlefield hidden beneath polite smiles. It simply felt peaceful. During dessert, my mother reached across the table and gently squeezed my hand. "You know, sweetheart," she said softly, "I always thought strength meant never falling. But you've shown me that real strength is about standing up again after someone knocks you down." I smiled, my throat tightening slightly. "It's not about who knocks you down," I replied. "It's about who you become afterward." The following weekend, Magnolia House hosted a charity gala, the restaurant's first major event since reopening. Guests filled the grand dining hall. Laughter, music, and champagne bubbled throughout the space. I stood near the balcony that overlooked the room, watching as people mingled, as plates were served with care, as life filled the very place that had once only been Daniel's distant dream. But it was no longer about revenge. It was never truly about revenge. The greatest victory was not proving him wrong. It was proving to myself that no one, not even family, had the right to define my worth. Later that night, as the final guests left and the staff cleaned up, I found myself once again sitting alone on the patio. Chef Amanda walked out quietly, handing me a warm cup of tea. "You good?" she asked softly. I smiled. "Better than good." She pulled up a chair beside me. "You know," she said, "most people would have burned him to the ground publicly. You had every right." I stared at the flickering candlelight between us. "Revenge feels good for a moment," I said. "But healing feels good forever." She nodded. "Wise words, boss." I chuckled softly. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to fully exhale. Because in the end, what Daniel never understood is that life is not a scoreboard. It's not about winning at someone else's expense. It's about peace, about truth, about knowing who you are even when others try to define you. And sometimes the most powerful response to betrayal isn't destroying your enemies. It's building a life so strong, so full, that they become irrelevant. To anyone out there listening who's ever been betrayed, manipulated, or underestimated, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not defined by what others say about you. You are not broken because someone tried to break you. You are stronger than the story they try to write for you. Write your own. Live your own. Because sometimes healing is the greatest revenge of all. If this story resonated with you, I invite you to share your experiences in the comments below. If you've ever faced family betrayal or found your strength in the midst of broken trust, you're not alone. And if you'd like to hear more powerful stories like this, stories of resilience, redemption, and truth, be sure to hit that subscribe button and join us for the next chapter. Thank you for listening. Months passed, and while life settled into something that finally resembled peace, the ripple effects of Daniel's actions still lingered in quiet, unexpected places. You see, when a family is shattered like ours had been, healing doesn't happen overnight, no matter how many apologies are exchanged or how many truths come to light. There are wounds that don't fully close, and there are scars that stay even when forgiveness is offered. In the weeks following Daniel's court settlement, I learned just how far his desperation had gone. My attorneys uncovered additional records, unpaid loans under fake business names, fraudulent pitches he had made to investors using forged financials, all while presenting himself as the family's next great entrepreneur. He wasn't just jealous of my business. He was trying to build a fake version of it on paper, borrowing my reputation as collateral without ever telling me. The state's Financial Crimes Division allowed Daniel to avoid jail in exchange for full restitution, asset surrender, and public admission of guilt. The media had a field day. The once charmed Parker family became Charleston's cautionary tale. Headlines ran for weeks. Brother's lies destroy sister's life until she took it all back. Charleston businesswoman exposes elaborate family fraud. From victim to victor, Olivia Parker's rise after betrayal. Strangers started recognizing me on the street. Not with judgment like before, but with quiet respect. The cashier at my favorite cafe smiled warmly. "You're that Magnolia House woman, right? What you did. That took guts." An elderly woman stopped me at the farmer's market, gently touching my arm. "You gave a lot of us hope, dear. Some of us carry family wounds too." Her words stayed with me long after she walked away. Because what I had lived through wasn't just my story. It was a story so many people recognized in pieces of their own lives. Surprisingly, my parents struggled most with the aftermath. Not because they doubted me anymore, but because they carried the crushing guilt of their own silence for years. One afternoon, my father visited me at Magnolia House unannounced. We sat at a corner table near the window as the evening light poured in. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Olivia, I failed you as a father." I looked at him gently. "Dad." But he held up his hand. "No, let me say this." His voice was quiet, trembling slightly. "For years, I thought keeping the peace meant avoiding conflict. That if I just kept Daniel happy, everything would eventually balance out. But I see now that my silence, our silence, allowed him to hurt you in ways no brother ever should." I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. "I know you thought you were protecting the family," I whispered. He nodded, eyes glossy. "But sometimes," he said, "peace built on denial isn't peace at all." That moment between us wasn't dramatic. There were no grand apologies, no fireworks. But there was something far more valuable: honesty. For the first time, my father and I truly saw each other not as perfect images of what a father and daughter are supposed to be, but as two people who had both carried their own burdens, made their own mistakes, and found their own ways back. Later that evening, after my father left, I stood alone once more on the Magnolia House balcony overlooking the quiet streets of Charleston. The city lights flickered below like little stars. The breeze carried the faint scent of salt and magnolia blooms. And as I stood there, I allowed myself a long, slow exhale. Not because everything was fixed, not because all wounds were healed, but because finally I no longer carried them alone. You see, betrayal may break you. It may shatter everything you believed was safe. But in that breaking, something else can be born. A version of you that no longer needs anyone else's permission to exist. A version of you that stops waiting for others to love you correctly and chooses to stand tall anyway. So to anyone out there listening to this story, if you've been betrayed by someone you trusted, if your own family has turned against you, if you've felt your world collapse beneath your feet, let me say this: you are not alone. You are not broken. You are not what they say you are. You are still here, still standing, still rising. And sometimes, the strongest people aren't the ones who never fall. They're the ones who rise after falling again and again and learn how to build something stronger every single time. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please share your own journey in the comments. Subscribe if you want more stories of healing, redemption, and rising after betrayal. Because trust me, there's so much more ahead.